BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to our Zodiac Killer book discussion on The Myth of the Zodiac Killer by Thomas Henry Horton. As you'll see here, this is listed as part 2, but if you haven't heard part 1 yet, that's fine, you can keep listening. We're just talking about the Zodiac Killer and the Zodiac hoax theory, but I hope at some point you'll go back and visit part 1. Don't you always hate it when you're listening to a program and they say, all right, now if you haven't heard part 1 yet, you need to hit stop and go find another episode. On this channel, I always wanted to be very clear that you can jump in the middle of any of these book discussions that we do. So with it, let's just get right into things. I think that this is also a very good time to listen if you haven't heard part 1, because there are still a few introductory things that we can say about the myth of the Zodiac Killer. And the first thing is thank you to everybody who left comments on part 1. But the reason why I wanted to talk about the myth of the Zodiac Killer once again was, in 2019, I began to develop a couple suspicions about the Zodiac Killer, and I thought it was quite surprising to look at some of the ways in which the crimes were committed, the ways in which the perpetrator would send in these letters and the cryptograms talking to the police and newspapers, and what on earth was going on. And I had also been learning about some other things that we talk about on the channel, notably the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, who's an alleged Zodiac Killer victim, and we've talked a lot about the Texarkana Moonlight murders recently from 1946, and of course Jack the Ripper. And my suspicion was that I felt someone or a group of people were almost trying to create a serial killer legend. And I know it sounds really silly when you say it like that, but that's the suspicion that I wanted to explore. And I really thought people were absolutely crazy when they were sending me these very long messages saying that, okay, that the Zodiac Killer was a hoax that was created by the San Francisco Chronicle. I thought that made absolutely no sense at all. And in reality, I think that I was being very dismissive, because that's actually somewhat in line with what my suspicion would be. Okay, somebody's trying to create a serial killer legend. Well, who is the somebody? And it could have been the San Francisco Chronicle, to create a serial killer mystery that could not possibly be solved. And one of the ways to do that is to have multiple people commit crimes wherein one person, maybe even a different person who didn't commit any murders, is writing letters and taking credit for it. And if you listen to some interviews with Thomas Henry Horton that he did prior to 2019, it seems like he was going down that pathway to a certain extent, whereas post-2019, it definitely appears that his suspect for writing the letters, Hal Snook, was more of the central architect of this, the mastermind, and Hal Snook not working for the San Francisco Chronicle, but as a narcotics officer and in Napa County. And if you just want to look at the pathway of Hal Snook being the lead perpetrator, then I think that would be an entirely different set of parameters, where you have this individual who is a World War II veteran who's feeling very bitter about not getting his medals, and arranged this, if you look at 1969, 25 years from 1944, the 25th anniversary of many events in his military service relating to World War II. I think that that is somewhat of a different angle. It is not completely out of line to say that that was not some type of an attempt to create a serial killer legend. But I can definitely say that Thomas Horton's theory accounts for a lot of the kind of gaps and places in which I wasn't able to answer the questions, and I wasn't able to completely have my suspicion confirmed. His theory goes a little bit further than just, someone who is looking at the charts and looking at the chronology and the dates and the times, as well as reading some of the descriptions of the Zodiac Killer activities, the murders, of course, but also the phone calls, the letters, the cryptograms, and just beginning to wonder, wow, there appears to be something that is just so horribly bizarre about this mystery. And I think that's one of the reasons why many people get pulled into this one, the bizarre and confusing nature of it all. So, if we're going to say those things, I would just like to leave one more thing before we get into some of the source material, and that is that in the graphic here you will see my copy of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, and Thomas Horton also sent me a book called 40 Days that is written by Tommy Jonk. That is one of his pen names. And if you see that there is this novel he's written called Gemini Tiger, you'll often see that copies of that have the name Tommy Jonk written on it. It was a pen name that he used for a time. I hope to read Gemini Tiger sometime in 2021. but I have to confess my reading list for 2020 is rather full. Now let's get right into some of your comments, because I would first like to start with a question that I asked during the part 1 episode, and that was something that somebody had asked me about: why wasn't the Zodiac hoax theory, that one person was writing letters taking credit for murders that he didn't commit, why wasn't this verified in the 1970s? If the FBI had assembled this case file and they had an enormous amount of access to these documents, and if they had 10 years to look at this stuff, even before Graysmith tried to publish a book in 1981, why didn't more people come to this conclusion and simply say, okay, look here, this is what happened. Someone is writing letters taking credit for murders that he did not commit. So, our first comment comes to us from Evan from Texas, who is going to give us a possible answer to that question. And Evan writes, with regard to the FBI, I don't think they were actively investigating the who is the Zodiac mystery in the sense everyone thinks. In fact, you can actually read the replies from the FBI people who write in and provide tips on who the Zodiac is, which is instructing people to contact the respective police departments with any information. Yes, the local police would submit fingerprints and handwriting samples to the FBI for comparisons and to match known suspects in their files. But I don't see any investigation on part of the FBI like you see in local police files, following leads, questioning suspects. Remember, it appears the whole reason the FBI was involved at all was because the Vallejo Times-Herald had filed extortion charges against this unknown letter writer. That's a federal case, so things like bank robbery, ransom, etc. would go to the FBI. Their interest would be in the person writing the letters, which, as far as the public was concerned, is the same person, and the murderer and the letter writer are one and the same. So even if the letter writer turned out not to be the murderer, there would still be a pending charge of extortion, and the letter writer could be charged with that. The FBI was correct in referring these tips for murderers from the public back to the local police, and that would be in their arena. Okay, big thank you to Evan from Texas. Always love your stuff. And that is the first comment that we had coming in there. Our next comment comes to us from Kelly Gable, who says, I personally believe Robert Graysmith did lie in his book Zodiac from 1986, and he did so for 3 reasons. Number 1, to draw out the Zodiac killer if he or she or they are still alive. Number 2, to throw off others because he wanted to solve the mystery himself. Number 3, the police asked him to withhold or lie so they could separate the liars from the real Zodiac killer or killers if someone came forward claiming to be or knew who the Zodiac killer was. Okay, excellent comment there, Kelly. And we did say in part 1 that there are 3 major claims that we're going to be investigating with this Zodiac Killer hoax discussion, the myth of the Zodiac Killer book discussion. And that is that, number 1, Robert Graysmith wrote a book in 1986 that was filled with fraudulent information, disinfo, a pack of lies. Number 2, that somebody was writing letters taking credit for murders that he did not commit because of certain pieces of information that we'll get into later. And number 3, that individual who was writing the letters was named Hal Snook. I think that almost everybody is in agreement about part 1. Not only people who are supporting the Zodiac hoax theory, not only people like Black Box Online Radio, you guys hear me, who are just wanting to learn more about it, but also I think that just absolutely everyone is in somewhat of an agreement that Robert Graysmith wrote a book that contained a lot of disinfo. Robert Graysmith wrote a book that contained a lot of fraudulent information, and that is one that you can see that people coming from all different sides of this mystery are achieving some sort of consensus about. Now, as far as the police asking him to withhold or lie so they could separate the liars from the real Zodiac killer or killers, I'm always open to new possibilities, but I mean, we are definitely going to have some things to certify that, or we're going to need a little bit more information. And this is what I would really find when I look at the myth of the Zodiac Killer, in the sense that it's not so much about how I'm saying that I don't believe Thomas Henry Horde. In fact, I would say that there are many things that he shares in this book that I think are very good ideas that I would agree with. There will be things that he will put in there that I will not agree with. And then there's a third category that is so much more like a thorn in your side, when it's saying that it's not that I don't agree with what you're saying, it's actually I'm just not convinced. I just don't feel completely certain. The same way if somebody were to tell you a story, okay, hey, here's what happened yesterday, and you're listening to that story and you're like, now wait a second, is that really true? And I experience a lot of those things here in the myth of the Zodiac Killer. Our next comment comes to us from Midnight Story Productions, which I believe is formerly known as the Haunted Library, right? Who says, good choice, thumbs up. And you guys did vote, and you said you wanted to hear about the myth of the Zodiac Killer, so that's what we're going to do. Next comment comes to us from Classic Chevy Cat Black, who says, hi, Ned. Great podcast. In the documentary, this is the Zodiac speaking. An officer, sorry, can't recall his name, said that David Faraday had his class ring or ring between his fingers tightly. Maybe he was about to ask Betty Lou to go steady. That was my first thought, of course. I'm a girl. I doubt seriously that he would have brought her to a meeting with some thug drug dealer. He may have driven all the way out there to build up courage, and as I recall, that road wasn't very well traveled as it is now. Perhaps he saw a pull out and took it. Maybe it was something that simple. And this is about the motivation for David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen to be at the parking lot on Lake Herman Road, December 20th of 1968. Prior to the Lake Herman Road shooting, why were they in that parking lot? Well, the stuff that we will see in Chapter 2 of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer really goes down the pathway that it's possible that there was some type of confrontation with a drug dealer thug, as she says. But why would Betty Lou Jensen be there? It's possible that there was some type of connection between David Faraday and law enforcement, that he was going to rat somebody out. I mean, alleged, if. Or she is simply saying that perhaps they were indeed on a real date and he just pulled over to a parking lot that was available because he wanted to talk to her, and that this is something that is quite different in the Zodiac Killer mystery. This is quite different from the Zodiac hoax theory, that they were just ambushed and caught off guard and someone was waiting for them there. These are all just different possibilities. But right now, I would like to go to the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, and we're going to be looking at one thing, because we just said some things about the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen at Lake Herman Road. Now, there's a question that begins this paragraph on page 21 of Chapter 2 that says, how could this be connected to the shooting of Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau, talking about Blue Rock Springs, of course? According to the files of the Vallejo Police Department, 2 undercover narcotics officers, rookie Richard Hoffman and Solano County Deputy Ben Villarreal, both reported being in the parking lot at the exact time of the shooting. Both denied seeing Darlene's car there. Surviving victim Mike Mageau told Solano County deputies that when the shooter parked his car behind Darlene's Corvair and got out, he and Darlene thought, from the man's behavior, that he was an undercover cop. And this is another question that is written here in the book. Was Hoffman the shooter? Was Richard Hoffman the shooter that night at Blue Rock Springs Park? I know with this one here, I wanted to do some things that were a little bit different, because we have done a previous book discussion on the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986 in the past, and I had always wanted to redo that one to iron out some of the rough parts, as well as to just have a little bit more consistency, continuity even with that. And I also wanted to put in some new material that we could talk about in a different way. And I think that this is a very good time to talk about Richard Hoffman, someone, as you heard there, who was in the Blue Rock Springs parking lot. And it says here in the book that it was at the time of the shooting. If I understand from reading other sources that we did, because we did a 3-part series on Richard Hoffman previously, just a couple weeks ago, maybe even about 7 days ago, and it was talking about how he was there 10 minutes or 15 minutes prior to the shooting. This is the first time that I've read that he was there at the time of the shooting and he reported being in the park there, but I'm sure that you get the idea. The figures are thereabouts. A very close time before the shooting, Richard Hoffman was there. Now, if we turn to a different Zodiac killer writer and researcher named Michael Butterfield, he put forward the claim that Thomas Henry Horn's theory about the myth of the Zodiac killer, saying that one person is writing letters taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit, is contingent upon the assumption that somebody would have read the police reports and then used that information to put it into the Zodiac killer letters, making people think that he is the real killer. And the reason why Butterfield says it's an assumption is because he doesn't accept that Thomas Henry Horn has proved his case. But this could, I even said this in part 2 of the Richard Hoffman discussion, has someone just thrown a giant wrench in the Zodiac hoax theory by saying that, hey, wait a second, he didn't read those reports, he wrote them. I almost said it in a humorous way because I don't have an ounce of ability to prove that Richard Hoffman was the Zodiac killer, but I think that this is one of the reasons why people want to talk about him a little bit more, because in part 1 of our Richard Hoffman discussion, we brought up the possibility, someone else had written this out on the internet just saying their theory about the Zodiac killer mystery, and they think that Richard Hoffman is the key to this, and not only because he would have been the Zodiac Killer, but their theory was that it was a policeman thrill kill club, which goes back to that initial suspicion that I had about just wondering, were multiple people committing murders in an attempt to create some type of 21st century Jack the Ripper style serial killer legend? And in terms of that, as I have to reiterate, I have to restate, I don't have an ounce of proof that I can just give you in a neat little package to say that that was true, but a lot of people definitely support that type of thinking. I mean, did Richard Hoffman shoot Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau? I can't really say too much about that, but I mean, Horan has even written this question in here: was Hoffman the shooter? I definitely think that that would answer some questions. I mean, I think that would answer some questions, and then maybe it would create some other things about why wouldn't Mike Mageau have said something or recognized certain things about Richard Hoffman in the 52 years since that shooting took place. But that's just something that I wanted to put out there. Now, if we're going to talk about the myth of the Zodiac Killer, and as we said, that Robert Graysmith was spreading a bunch of material that is not very accurate, that is, I mean, you could even say beyond inaccurate, that contains blatant fabrications. Let's look at something that is on page 29. We're here in chapter 2 still, and I just want to talk about the events that happened with Darlene Ferrin prior to being shot at Blue Rock Springs, in a very famous incident that Graysmith writes about, known as the Painting Party. Darlene Ferrin hosted a painting party that the Zodiac Killer may have attended. Let's see what Thomas Henry Horan has to say about that. Graysmith continues, chapter 2, yet with another fabrication. It was the quote-unquote painting party that finally induced Karen to stop babysitting for Darlene Ferrin. Darlene's own widowed husband, Dean, has repeatedly denied that any sort of painting party ever occurred at the house on Tennessee Street. So have other reliable witnesses. I mean, meaning so have other reliable witnesses, as they have denied that there was a painting party. The other guests were Jay Eisen, Ron Allen, Rick Crabtree, Paul the bartender, which is not his real name, Richard Hoffman, Steve Baldino, and Howard Buzz Gordon. The latter three were Vallejo cops. And this will go into some other sets of ideas about how, like as you heard there, I mean, Graysmith is trying to set a particular stage, but I mean, Darlene's husband Dean denies that any of that actually occurred. And another thing, though, that we should say in regards to any possible connections between Darlene Ferrin and Richard Hoffman, Horan has also shared something here that it is rumored that Darlene Ferrin had numerous affairs with people, and it's possible she was even on a date with Mike Mageau when she was murdered, even though she was married. But what Horan would like to share on page 31 is the only person who has ever admitted to investigators that he had any kind of affair with Darlene was named Gordon Arthur Spence, who had worked for Vallejo PD briefly before joining the Navy. According to his own statement, Spence just got to turn the page here, one of the big downsides of paper books, unheroically ran off to join the military when Darlene supposedly hinted that she was pregnant. To the credit of Richard Hoffman, or in his statement and in his own words, he adamantly denies that he ever even knew Darlene Ferrin or that anything like that happened. But people don't always necessarily come forward very easily when they have done something wrong in the past. I mean, that's not exactly rocket science right there, so I don't think that needs any further explanation. And in terms of the things that Graysmith is putting in the book, you can see that he has really got on the nerves of the family of Arthur Lee Allen, because Ron Allen, the brother of Arthur Lee Allen, has in fact attempted to take legal action against Graysmith and St. Martin's Press for the flat-out lies in the 1986 book Zodiac, and that is the last part that is written there. So what I can say is that I think that it's really bizarre to see Richard Hoffman's name come up like that, as you heard one of the guests on this painting party that allegedly never happened, but why is it there in the first place? And also, I mean, as we heard, I mean, they're not really trying to hide anything. Richard Hoffman is at Blue Rock Springs. Richard Hoffman is at the painting party. But this could also be a false seed that has been planted by Graysmith, in short, just to add an additional layer of confusing and distorting behavior. But I would actually like to extend the question out to you. Why do you think Robert Graysmith lied in the book Zodiac? I mean, if anything, even in part one, when we read off some segments about that are just obviously false, and you can go back and listen to part one if you haven't heard it yet, but why do you think that he included all of these intentional misleading statements lies, fabrications, incorrect info, inaccurate information? What was the motivation for that? Was it only just to get a book published? If you write in the comment section that you think the only reason why Robert Graysmith would spread all this disinfo is because he wanted his Zodiac Killer book published, I wouldn't get mad at you. I wouldn't even really disagree with you that much. Or is there another ulterior, sinister motive that is going on here? And then at some point we will get to the possibility of Robert Graysmith being an active participant in this mystery. All right, well, that's all for me now. Please share anything you have in the comment section below. And also, what do you make of these odd connections about Richard Hoffman just popping up in too many places? I mean, I think it would make anybody feel uncomfortable. Is that just Graysmith spinning a bunch of craziness? Or do you think there actually is something sinister going on there? That's all for me now. See you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.